"Nothing changes tomorrow," my father announced, lifting his wine glass as if he were making a toast instead of claiming control over my future. "The trust stays under my management. That is what's best for everyone." Everyone at the table looked at me. My mother smiled tightly. My older sister, Vanessa, leaned back in her chair and said, "Good. Then we can finally start renovating the lake house once everything settles." It was my 21st birthday dinner. The trust they were discussing contained more money than I had ever allowed myself to think about, an 8-figure inheritance my grandfather had created specifically for me. Yet no one had asked what I wanted. My father spoke as though the money already belonged to him. My mother acted as though disagreeing would prove I was immature. Vanessa was already planning how to spend it. I lowered my eyes to my phone beneath the table. A message had just arrived from my grandfather's longtime attorney. "Transfer completed. All assets are now held by Brooks Private Holdings. Sole controlling member, Natalie Brooks." I locked the screen before anyone noticed. For the first time that evening, I smiled. My parents thought they were securing their control. They had no idea the trust was already empty. "Is something funny?" my father asked. "No," I said calmly. "I'm just enjoying my birthday." He studied me for a moment, then returned to explaining how dangerous sudden wealth could be for someone my age. He had given the same speech for years. Money was too complicated, lawyers were too aggressive, questions were disrespectful. I had believed him until 3 months earlier when my grandfather's attorney, Martin Hale, requested a private meeting. He showed me an original document my parents had never seen, a beneficiary control certificate signed by my grandfather before his death. It gave me complete authority the moment I turned 21. "My instructions are to release this only to you," Martin had said. "Your grandfather was concerned someone might try to interfere." That afternoon, hours before dinner, I had signed the final transfer documents. I told no one. The next day, while reviewing graduate school applications in my apartment, my phone rang. "Ms. Brooks?" a woman asked. "This is Eleanor Price from Sterling Private Bank. We need to verify an emergency request to liquidate your family trust." I sat upright. "I didn't request any liquidation." There was a pause. Papers shifted on her end. "The request was submitted this morning," she said carefully. "It authorizes the immediate sale of the entire portfolio." My fingers tightened around the phone. "Who submitted it?" Another pause. Then she lowered her voice. "The authorization appears to have come from your parents." I drove straight to my parents' house. My father opened the door before I could knock twice. He was still wearing the navy sweater from my birthday dinner, but the warmth he had performed for the family was gone. "What did you do?" I asked. He stepped aside. "Come in. Don't make a scene on the porch." My mother was waiting in the living room with Vanessa. A folder sat on the coffee table between them. Dad lowered himself into his chair. "The bank called you, didn't they? They said someone tried to liquidate my entire trust." "Not someone," he corrected. "Your parents." The way he said it made the betrayal sound like a favor. "It's routine restructuring," he continued. "The assets need to be consolidated before you make a decision you regret. I didn't authorize it." My mother leaned forward. "Natalie, large amounts of money destroy young people. Your father has protected that trust for years." Vanessa crossed her legs. "And there are investments waiting. We can't freeze the whole family's future because you suddenly want to play businesswoman." I looked at her. "What investments?" Her eyes flicked toward Dad. He opened the folder and tapped a page. "Sign this. It confirms continued management authority." I didn't touch it. Instead, I asked, "What was the trust balance yesterday morning?" He answered immediately. The figure was exact. He should not have been able to see it after my transfer. Mom placed a hand over mine. "The lawyers have already approved everything." "Which lawyers?" She hesitated. Vanessa broke the silence with a careless laugh. "Can we stop acting like this is a crime? Mom and Dad are finally making sure my future is secure too." The room went still. Dad turned sharply toward her. "Vanessa." She looked down. I stood and picked up my bag. "I need time to think." Dad's jaw tightened. "You have until tonight." I walked outside without answering. Before I reached my car, my phone rang. It was Eleanor from the bank. "You need to come in immediately," she said. "Someone just submitted another document." By the time I reached Sterling Private Bank, the atmosphere had changed completely. A security officer met me in the lobby instead of the receptionist. "Ms. Brooks," he said politely, "please come with me." He escorted me to a large conference room on the executive floor. The moment I walked in, every conversation stopped. My father sat confidently at the head of the table beside my mother. Vanessa occupied the chair next to them, while two compliance officers, the bank's legal counsel, and several senior managers reviewed thick files spread across the polished table. Dad folded his hands. "There she is." The tone wasn't welcoming. It sounded like an accusation. "You've delayed this process long enough," he said. "We're simply trying to administer the trust responsibly." I remained standing. "I never authorized any liquidation." My mother sighed dramatically. "This is exactly what we were afraid of. Someone has filled your head with terrible advice." Vanessa shook her head in disappointment. "You're risking everyone's future because you suddenly think you know more than professionals." One of the compliance officers raised a hand. "Let's stay focused on the documentation." Dad immediately slid several signed forms across the table. "These establish my continuing authority over the trust until administration is complete." The officer carefully examined each page. Nobody spoke. Only the quiet turning of paper filled the room. Finally, she looked up. "Mr. Brooks, I have one question." "Of course." "When, in your understanding, did the beneficiary legally assume full control of this trust?" Dad answered without hesitation. "Tomorrow." The compliance officer glanced at another document on her tablet before looking back at him. "No." Her voice remained calm. "The beneficiary assumed full legal control yesterday evening." The room fell silent. Dad frowned. "That isn't possible. It is according to the records currently available to us." He leaned forward. "There must be some mistake." The officer didn't argue. Instead, she pressed a button on the conference phone. "I'd like internal records to perform one final verification before any transaction proceeds." She ended the call and looked around the table. "Until that review is complete, no liquidation will be approved." For the first time since I'd entered the room, I saw uncertainty cross my father's face. He looked toward my mother. She avoided his eyes. Vanessa quietly stopped smiling. No one in the room knew what internal records was about to discover. The wait lasted less than 20 minutes. It felt much longer. No one spoke above a whisper. The compliance officers continued reviewing electronic records, while the bank's legal counsel quietly exchanged notes. My father kept checking his watch, as though impatience alone could force the process forward. Then the conference room door opened. A senior records manager walked in, carrying a printed report. She handed it directly to the lead compliance officer. The officer read the first page, then looked at my father. "Mr. Brooks, we have a serious problem." Dad straightened in his chair. "What problem?" "The trust account no longer holds the assets referenced in your liquidation request." His expression hardened. "That can't be correct." She slid the report across the table. "The account balance reflects only residual administrative funds. The investment portfolio is no longer owned by the trust." Vanessa frowned. "What does that even mean?" "It means," the officer replied evenly, "the securities you requested to liquidate are no longer trust assets." Dad pushed the report away. "There has to be a banking error. I reviewed the portfolio only a few days ago. You reviewed it before the beneficiary assumed legal control." The words landed heavily. My mother finally spoke. "So, where did the money go?" No one answered immediately. Instead, another compliance specialist entered carrying copies of the liquidation request. "We've completed our preliminary document review," he said. "There are discrepancies requiring immediate investigation." He laid the paperwork beside my father. "The beneficiary authorization appears inconsistent with the bank's authenticated signature records. We also identified timestamp irregularities." Dad's face lost its color. "What are you implying?" "We're not implying anything," the specialist replied. "We're preserving evidence until our review is complete." The conversation had completely changed. Only 30 minutes earlier, everyone had been questioning me. Now every question was directed toward my parents. I finally spoke. I met privately with my grandfather's attorney before my birthday. Every head turned toward me. Dad stared. "You did what?" "I'll explain when my legal counsel arrives." His voice rose for the first time all afternoon. "Natalie, where is the money?" Vanessa's composure cracked. "You moved it?" she blurted out. "You couldn't have moved it." My mother looked from me to Dad in confusion. "Richard, tell me you know what's happening." He didn't answer. Outside the conference room, 2 members of the bank's investigative team quietly entered. One addressed my parents respectfully. "Mr. and Mrs. Brooks, we'd appreciate it if you remained in the building until our documentation review is complete." Dad looked offended. "Are we being detained?" "No, sir. We're asking for your cooperation." Before anyone could say another word, I reached into my briefcase. Inside was a sealed envelope I had carried with me since my meeting with Martin Hale. I placed it gently on the conference table. My father froze. His eyes locked onto the elegant handwriting across the front. He recognized it instantly. It was my grandfather's handwriting. At that exact moment, the conference room door opened again. "My apologies for the delay," Martin Hale said as he stepped inside. "I believe it's time we opened that envelope." Martin Hale closed the conference room door behind him and walked directly to my side of the table. No one spoke. He carefully picked up the sealed envelope and held it where everyone could see my grandfather's signature across the flap. "This seal has remained intact since Arthur Brooks signed it," Martin said. "Per his written instructions, it could only be opened after Natalie reached the age of 21 and only if her authority over the trust was challenged." My father's confidence disappeared. "What is that?" he demanded. Martin looked at him calmly. "The one document you never knew existed." He broke the seal. Inside was a single original certificate along with my grandfather's signed letter. Martin placed the certificate on the table. "This is the original beneficiary control certificate, executed simultaneously with the trust documents. Arthur Brooks specifically instructed that no copies were to be provided to anyone except the drafting attorney. Every family copy of the trust package intentionally omitted this document." My mother stared at the page. Why would he hide it from us? Martin unfolded the letter. "Because he anticipated exactly what happened today." The room became perfectly still. He began reading aloud. "If Natalie is holding this document, then someone has attempted to interfere with the independence I intended her to have. I love my family, but I have watched financial favoritism grow for years. This trust belongs to my granddaughter alone. No one, not even her parents, should ever control it once she reaches adulthood." My father's face drained of color. "That isn't possible." "It is," Martin replied. "Yesterday afternoon, Natalie lawfully exercised the authority granted by this certificate. Every trust asset was transferred into Brooks Private Holdings, a private holding company of which she is the sole legal member and manager." The lead compliance officer nodded. "That matches the transaction history we verified," Martin continued. "Therefore, when Mr. Brooks submitted liquidation instructions this morning, the trust no longer owned the investments identified in those documents." Silence. Then my father whispered, "No." The compliance officer slid the liquidation packet back toward him. "Your documents requested the sale of assets over which you no longer possessed any authority." The bank's forensic specialist opened another folder. "Our signature examination is complete." He laid several enlarged comparisons across the table. "The beneficiary authorization contains material inconsistencies with Ms. Brooks's authenticated signatures. We have also confirmed altered execution dates on multiple supporting documents." My father immediately looked at my mother. She lowered her eyes. "I thought," she whispered, "I thought it would all be finished before she ever found out." Vanessa's voice shook. "You told me everything was legal." Dad tried to recover. "I was protecting this family." "No," Martin answered firmly. "You were attempting to take control of property that legally belonged to Natalie." The lead compliance officer closed her file. "Effective immediately, this transaction is permanently denied. In accordance with banking regulations, All documentation related to today's submission will be preserved and forwarded to the appropriate authorities for review. No one argued. There was nothing left to argue. The evidence spoke for itself. Within weeks, the consequences reached every corner of our family. Civil proceedings began almost immediately, followed by a criminal investigation into the forged authorization documents and attempted fraudulent liquidation. My father lost the professional licenses that had defined his career for decades. Clients withdrew their business, colleagues distanced themselves, and the reputation he had spent a lifetime building collapsed under the weight of his own decisions. My mother faced legal consequences for participating in the fraudulent paperwork. Far more painful for her, however, was the reaction from relatives who finally understood why my grandfather had structured the trust the way he had. Vanessa canceled the lake house renovation before the first contractor ever arrived. The business venture she had already planned around my inheritance never materialized because the money had never been hers to expect. As for me, I honored my grandfather's wishes exactly as he intended. Brooks Private Holdings became the foundation of my future, not my family's leverage. I funded my graduate education without borrowing a dollar. I established scholarships in my grandfather's name for students studying finance and fiduciary law so others could understand the importance of protecting what had been entrusted to them. I built an independent investment structure with governance rules, ensuring that no relative, no matter how close, could ever obtain authority over my assets without my explicit consent. Several months later, I visited my grandfather's grave with Martin. I placed fresh flowers beside the headstone. "He trusted you," Martin said quietly. I smiled. He also taught me something I didn't fully understand until now. Martin looked at me. "What's that?" "That love and trust aren't the same thing." As I walked away, I realized my grandfather hadn't simply left me an 8-figure trust. He had left me the freedom to decide who deserved a place in my future. My parents believed they controlled my inheritance. They never realized the only document that truly mattered had already placed my future safely in my own hands.